Hi, everyone. Happy Monday. It's 4 o'clock in New York. There are multiple developments today that, more than anything else, prove that former CIA Director John Brennan lives rent-free in Donald Trump's head. The Associated Press is reporting that the Justice Department has subpoenaed several witnesses to testify before a federal grand jury in Washington as part of its investigation into former Director Brennan. That is according to 3 people familiar with the matter. It comes as we're learning that the lead prosecutor in the investigation into John Brennan in a separate jurisdiction in the Southern District of Florida has been dismissed from the case after she raised concerns about its legal viability. The source says the veteran prosecutor, Maria Medidas Long, told colleagues in her office that she had recently told her bosses there was not ample justification to bring criminal charges against John Brennan. In a statement, the Department of Justice claims it's, quote, routine practice to rearrange attorneys in cases that they are assigned. So Trump has reached deep into the political crony grab bag to come out with this guy, Trump loyalist and his former campaign lawyer, Joseph diGenova. He's going to take over the Brennan case and Donald Trump's broader so-called grand conspiracy case. Maybe one of the earliest offenses to Donald Trump was this moment back in 2017.
I encountered and am aware of information and intelligence that revealed contacts and interactions between Russian officials and U.S. persons involved in the Trump campaign. I had unresolved questions in my mind as to whether or not the Russians had been successful in getting U.S. persons involved in the campaign or not to work on their behalf, again, either in a witting or unwitting fashion. And so, therefore, I felt as though the FBI investigation was certainly well-founded and needed to look into those issues.
That was 9 years ago. It birthed a term that's been used every day since then when this comes up, wittingly or unwittingly. Now, that finding was affirmed, importantly, by Trump-aligned special counsel John Durham. It was affirmed by Trump handpicked Attorney General Bill Barr. It was affirmed separately in a totally separate investigation by then Senator Marco Rubio, who was the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. It was also affirmed by Robert Mueller's nearly 2-year-long investigation and recounted in Volume 1 of its report. For his part, John Brennan, who is now a senior national security analyst at this network, has made clear on this program that he has done nothing wrong.
We're still going over this ground that has been, I think, fairly well and exhaustively plowed. We went to whatever lengths we needed to go to in order to make sure that we're able to follow through with the President Obama's request that a comprehensive and exhaustive review be done of Russian interference in the 2016 election, because he and others realized that the Russians were going to continue to do this in subsequent elections.
The Trump administration wielding the Justice Department as a weapon against the official who sounded the alarm over the 2016 Trump campaign's ties to Russia is where we start today. New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush is here. Also joining us, former assistant special agent in charge at the FBI and national security and intelligence analyst Michael Feinberg is here. Glenn Thrush, this is a story we have been covering, if not daily, then at least weekly, ever since Donald Trump has been a political figure. What is your sense of the fact that it's 9 years in, and for all that Trump has abandoned, investigating and punishing and prosecuting the investigators into Russia's attack on the 2016 presidential election is still top of mind?
Well, I mean, it is just absolutely stunning when you kind of look at it from the stretch of history. And watching, you know, not a slight on Brennan, watching all of us having aged over these 9 years is just pretty remarkable. Look, I think what we're dealing with here is we had an attorney general in Pam Bondi who was on extremely thin ice, non-existent ice, boiling water more like it. And you have her successor, Todd Blanche, who has to prove to the president in very quick fashion that he's tougher than Pam Bondi. So in order to do this, he has got to show Trump, he's got to demonstrate that he is willing to go after some of the people that Trump most wants to target, some of the real ancient enemies. And there's no one more ancient in this particular fight than Brennan. And we're told this is, again, a bifurcated process. You've got the lying to Congress bit, which is always kind of the lowest hanging fruit in these criminal investigations taking place out of, I believe, Jeanine Pirro's office in Washington on one track. And then you have this grand conspiracy thing, which no one can really figure out quite what is going on in Florida with Jason Quinones, and this tremendous fiasco in which the lead prosecutor in this case was like, later, I don't want anything to do with this. And who did you put in place? Joe diGenova, one of the oldest Trump cronies. I know diGenova because I sat next to him at the Gridiron for a couple of years. So, I mean, like, it's a perfect example of where we're headed. The personalization of all this stuff. It really is like a reality TV show with a very, very limited cast.
And let me just, I know you weren't suggesting he did, but there's no evidence that Director Brennan lied to Congress. That specific piece of this attempt at criminal prosecution is what this prosecutor resigned over. This is from my colleague Carol Lennox reporting. Meditas Long agreed weeks ago to help her boss, Miami U.S. Attorney Jason Quinones, probe possible law violations tied to how Obama's DOJ opened the investigation into Russian interference in 2016. Meditas Long was specifically focused on probing allegations that Jim Jordan referred to DOJ in 2025, claiming he had evidence suggesting Brennan made false statements to Congress in 23 about that investigation and his role. So this is the stretch that they tried in the Eastern District of Virginia with Comey, with the lying to Congress. This is what Eric Siebert, a MAGA adjacent or MAGA acceptable prosecutor, left over. The exact same words were used, Glenn, and I'll read from your story too, about her boss at the U.S. Attorney's Office, the top prosecutor there, Jason Redding Quinones, is an ardent Trump loyalist who's been leading a far-ranging inquiry into the president's perceived political adversaries, including Brennan. Mr. Quinones had told senior Justice Department officials he plans to take action, possibly asking a grand jury to indict Brennan in the next few weeks, according to these people. So this is exactly what happened in the Eastern District of Virginia when the politicals wanted to indict Comey, and the people in the office left en masse because the facts didn't support it. This is playing out, it sounds like, in an office with a bit of a Trump bulwark there heading the office, and Mr. Quinones. But clearly the prosecutor who was working on this has already made public, has already revealed that the facts don't support an indictment of Brennan. Does that matter to the judges or the other branch of government, Glenn?
Yes. And I'll throw one more layer onto this, Nicole. We reported last fall, I think it was, that the prosecutor in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, who was initially looking at some of the Brennan charges, punted it back to Blanche, who subsequently sent it down to Southern Florida. This is like leftovers of leftovers, right? So I think all grand juries, now the presumption, of course, the reason why this case has been split into two is because a DC jury is going to be a very, very tough sell on this. We have seen them return no true bills over and over again, to the point where the Trump Justice Department has cast no true bills. And for your viewers, it just means that a grand jury is like, nope, we're not going to bring an indictment. Highly unusual activity prior to the second Trump term, but now very commonplace. South Florida, the presumption is Fort Pierce, Miami. These are venues that have juries that are probably more favorable to President Trump. But even these juries and these judges might have a hard time digesting cases where there's a lack of evidence. So I think what we are doing here again is this entire enormous criminal justice system of the United States, which is predicated on rule of law, is at the moment being aimed at satisfying the requirements of the chief executive.
Michael Feinberg, it is hard to overstate for people that have never worked inside the Department of Justice how abnormal, how far from anything trustworthy or moral or worthy of the taxpayer-funded people doing this work we are. But take a stab at explaining how bat bleep crazy all of this is.
Well, first of all, there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever anywhere in the public record that John Brennan did anything wrong. And as you noted, there is quite the contrary. There are shelves, books, and volumes filled with documentation and historical archives that Russia was in fact trying to influence the 2016 election, that to a certain extent they were successful. And let's not forget, a number of individuals in the president's orbit were either convicted at trial or pled guilty for consistently lying to federal investigators or trying to obfuscate their communications with Russian officials. What we have here is trying to use the prosecutorial and judicial process to literally rewrite history. And, I'm just going to note on a personal level, this essentially comes down to weighing the credibility of John Brennan versus the credibility of Donald Trump. And even if I knew nothing about the set of circumstances, I would probably go with the guy who had not been convicted of multiple crimes at the state level and indicted for multiple crimes at the federal level, and who was accused regularly of breaching business contracts. This is a no-brainer.